Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Hawk Zone Rundown. It's Bryce, and I'm kind of running solo tonight. But with that being said, we're going to have a couple guests come on from the Rams Up podcast, kind of keeping with our divisional opponent breakdown before the season. We had Jesse Naylor on from Last Second Sports, kind of previewing the 49ers and his thoughts of the moves the Seahawks made this offseason. And now we'll get the perspective of the LA Rams. And based on my kind of preseason look at things, I think the Rams might be the best team in the NFC West. So we will take a deep dive into that with the guys from Rams Up. So after the break and after this intro, we're going to get right into it.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game.
For this run. What a run. Marshawn Lynch. Get off me.
DK.
Yes, sir.
Hey, it's John Schneider with the Seattle Seahawks.
And Washington's got a lead. Leon Wilson to catch. Jackson, Smith, and Jigba. The Seahawks are going to host the NFC Championship.
Every year, the NFL does. Is it going to be
You've got
another
to look for
9-8?
players
Mike
who've
Macdonald
got to finish something.
They have to fix the offensive
Part of his
line.
success and part of
ambition of being the LOB
Want to hear? That's trading DK Metcalf.
Play him aggressive.
This is the Hawks Zone Rundown with Ryan and Bryce.
I've got Paul and Mark from the Rams Up podcast joining me tonight to kind of talk LA Rams, Seattle Seahawks, how this division looks. So, guys, welcome to the Hawk Zone Rundown.
glad to be here.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
So, guys, just to give our listeners kind of like an idea of what the Rams Up podcast is, how it started. I don't know which one of you wants to take this question, but yeah, kind of explain the show you guys run.
Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess that's on me. 3 years ago, I think it was, I was really disappointed with the podcasts that were available. So I decided to give it a shot, start it from scratch, got into it. I did it for, I don't know, maybe a year by myself. And then one of our other friends, Tom Quartz, reached out to me and he joined it occasionally. And he brought Paul and Ian on board. They had, shared a lot of Rams discussions on Twitter. And, it just evolved into, it's really been lately me, Ian, and Paul. We do a weekly roundtable, talk all kinds of football. And then I do the podcast on during the season, 6 a week, try to get about 6 a week out this time of year, every other night. But Paul and Ian have just been a big addition because they know the X's and O's and they know personnel. And I'm just a fan that's been kind of like, they've been educating me actually, learning X's and O's and gaps and schemes and all these different coverages. So it's been a really good thing we've got going on, I think.
Mark's being modest. He knows the X and O's a lot better than he's letting on.
Well, that's awesome, guys. So for us, we really want to bring our listeners kind of different perspectives from our division rivals. Obviously, the Seahawks and the Rams have had quite the rivalry over the past, I'd say, 20 years or so, dating back to the Mike Holmgren era there in Seattle. So we thought we'd bring you guys on, have a kind of back and forth. So let's kind of get into that. So how did this offseason go by your guys' standards for what you thought it was going to be like to what it actually turned out being up to training camp starting?
You can take that, Paul.
So, yeah, we've been really, really excited on our end for I don't know how much background in terms of the offseason, so we'll just share some highlights. So, we've had a number of free agent signings. We were very, very excited about the draft. One thing that we do is we do a ton of mock drafts in the offseason, which really helps us because we're familiar with a lot of the players, right? So when we were talking about the Seahawks draft, I immediately knew every player. And I was sharing about Barner and Knight, so that really helped us. So we're really excited about the draft. Jared, Team Rams Up. We're pumped about Jared Verse and Fisk. We call him the Fisk factor. We think those two are going to have an immediate impact. Overall, the free agency we have from the Hawks, Parkinson. So we're really, really excited. There's a great segment. I think Hawk fans will love it where, it's all about Parkinson and they call it coming home. Coming back, he played high school out in LA. So it's a great segment. So we're really excited about that. The Rams have a couple of big boy signings on the O-line, RK Dot, Kevin Dotson, the Beast. They brought him back as a free agent signing. And then we signed, what's his name, Jackson from Detroit. Unfortunately, he just got hurt yesterday. He's going to be recouping for about 6 weeks, so he's going to miss the rest of the preseason. So our O-line is just absolutely massive. Last year's pick, Steve Avila, the center, he was playing guard, but his natural position is center. They moved him to center. So when you look across the board, the O-line average is somewhere around 318. So, yeah, so it's actually really, really neat because our coach McVay has moved away from that, just the outside zone scheme. We're running a lot more power gap. So it's going to be exciting. We have two really good running backs, Kyron Williams, who played extensively last year, and they just drafted Blake, the kid from Michigan. So we're excited.
Paul's all in on the nicknames if you didn't get that yet.
I'm in charge of the nicknames. I love the nicknames.
Add to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So offensively, I think the Rams are in a really good space as long as the injuries don't mount up on the O-line. But I think they're in a good space. I think the question was from last year, they were really, really young on offense. So we've been monitoring like the depth aspect of it. They were very shrewd, and they were very sort of astute in who they brought on. A character is a big thing for McVay and the rest of the brain trust. So, they signed White, the cornerback from Buffalo. That was a great signing. He's apparently going to be healthy. He's already taking big reps in the preseason. They brought back Darius Williams, who had previously played with the Rams. And, hey, Macdonald might be familiar with him, right, from his days with the Ravens.
Yep.
Big player. So he unfortunately got hurt. He has a hamstring pull, so he's laid up for the preseason as well. So it's really about the attention was really on how they're going to rebuild that defense. They have a new DC. Shula is our new DC. As you know, Raheem Morris deservedly got a shot at Atlanta. So good luck to him. Great defensive coordinator. So Shula apparently is going to dial it up a little bit more. So look for a little bit more blitzing on the Rams. They're still going to play that zone. So yeah, for us, it's exciting. And I think like everybody else in the NFL, trying to figure out the special teams, what it's going to look like this year with the new kickoff rule.
Yeah, and as much as we like this draft, we have to come clean. The Rams were trying to trade up for Byron Murphy. So there is that.
Yeah, there is that small fact in it. No, I've seen the behind-the-scenes draft part for the Rams where you see McVay and trying to get up and get into that range to get Byron Murphy, which to me, that was the one fear I had was if he falls to you guys there, we're going to have a similar effect that Aaron Donald obviously had because now his retirement's a kind of a big deal going into, I guess, this offseason for you guys to try and replace probably the greatest defensive tackle, in my opinion, in NFL history. And all I could think was, great, Byron Murphy, the way the draft was falling, he's going to fall right into the LA Rams' lap, and we're going to be having headaches again for years up here in Seattle because I think it was on NFL Network. I was watching when he made his announcement, and they're showing kind of highlights, and it looked like 3/4 to 80% of those were Russell Wilson ending up on his back or Geno Smith. And I'm going, come on, like he must have hit other quarterbacks in the NFL. Like he had to have. It couldn't have just been that freak when he was. And then I thought about it, and I was like, well, considering how bad our O-lines have been in Seattle, yeah, that probably is accurate that he was abusing Russell Wilson and Geno Smith more than anybody else.
I think that even goes back to his St. Louis days, when the Rams were horrible. Aaron Donald had some big games against the Seahawks.
Yeah, no, he did. So speaking of your guys' kind of young offense, you obviously get Puka Nacua in year 2 now. You've obviously added some skill position talent in Blake Corum. How does this look with Matthew Stafford? Obviously, he's coming off a bit of an injury situation. He's got a new contract. How much longer do you guys think Stafford's going to be the guy in LA? And when do you guys think they're going to have to start really looking at that next quarterback to come in? Because is Jimmy Garoppolo your backup, I believe, right now?
He's suspended for the first 2 weeks, and after that, he would be. Stetson Bennett would be the next man up. Would be the backup weeks 1 and 2, and Paul, Ian, and I go round and round about Matthew Stafford, and we're thinking he's going to be around for 2 or 3 more years, if he wants to be. I kind of sense that if we were able to get another ring, he might retire. But who knows what he's thinking? But the Rams, this Paul will probably vouch for this. This power running game they moved to was really a result of them deciding they needed to get big and strong in the middle of that interior offensive line to protect him. And then I think it dawned on them, hey, these guys, Dotson, Avila, guys like that are great for this duo power running game. So it's kind of a fallout from just trying to protect Stafford and extend his career. Paul, we've talked about this. You're hoping Stafford's around for a couple more years at least, right?
Yeah, his contract runs through 26. As you know, the most recent update, they just tweaked his contract, move a little bit of money. It wasn't that extensive. A lot of the Ram beat writers were saying the same thing from the outside observer standpoint. It seemed like it was more he just wanted a commitment from the squad that they're going to go for it, all in for the next couple of years while he's there. Because as you know, if he's going to get battered and bruised, he wants to make sure that he's got a little bit more guaranteed money up front, but he also wants to make sure that he's going to be doing it for the ultimate reason, which is, to get another ring. So, I think he's going to be there at least until 26. I mean, honestly, if his arm holds up, I mean, that guy could play probably until he could pull a Brady. He could pull a Brady as long as his body holds up, because he's been battered. His years in Detroit has taken its toll.
No, I totally agree. And I love Matthew Stafford. Honestly, when he was kind of humming and hawing about whether or not he was going to leave Detroit, I kind of was like, you know what, if I'm Seattle, at that point for me, I was off Russell Wilson about 2017 in Seattle. I had kind of seen where we were going to get to at that point, and that was the year we decided to bring in Blair Walsh as our kicker and miss the playoffs. But Russell was I think he was 90% of our offense that year. We didn't have a running game. Russell did everything, and I kind of went, if his legs go here in the next couple of years, Russell hasn't developed enough as a passer to succeed in the NFL. So when Matthew Stafford started to have those conversations of, hey, you know what, I'm thinking of leaving the Detroit, I might want to go. I was like, you know what, Seattle, try and go and get him and bring him in, because as I agree with you, Paul, Stafford, to me, I think he's one of the most underrated quarterbacks probably in the last 15 years of the NFL, where people kind of forget how good he's been because he was stuck in Detroit for so many years there with Calvin Johnson, obviously, and he put up some numbers, but because he wasn't winning, because the rest of the team was horrible, people kind of forgot about him. And then obviously he comes to you guys the first year and you guys win a Super Bowl. I still think there's a lot left in Matthew Stafford, which scares me because I view him as the best quarterback in the NFC West. And we were talking off before we started, Paul, I picked you guys to win the NFC West in most of my predictions for the rankings. I see you guys as a 12-win team in most of those situations because of Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and obviously you guys have, in my opinion, the best play caller in the NFL in Sean McVay. So I did have a question, though, for you guys about a coach that Seattle actually ended up plucking out of the Rams this year in Jake Peetz. So I'm not very familiar with Jake Peetz. I know he had a role. I think he was pass game coordinator potentially with the Rams or whatever he was down there. I'm not sure. Could you guys kind of give our listeners an insight into him? Because everything I've heard is he's a phenomenal coach.
You want to roll with that, Paul? Because I'm not sure.
I mean, yeah. So he was the passing game coordinator. I mean, I don't know too much about him, but he was cited that he had a very good relationship with Matthew Stafford, and that he was very good at developing quarterbacks. So that bodes very well from your scenario, that his ability to sort of relate to quarterbacks, the insights with the passing game, were definitely an area of strength for him. So he's very relatable in that aspect. Has a modern understanding of the pro game. Can has played in offenses where they played wide open with a spread, can play from a sort of a balanced attack as well. So I think that was really, really important. I'm curious, since you brought up Pete, is like, what is your feeling in terms of the Seahawks quarterback scenario?
So that's actually an interesting question. So I got posed this question the other day on one of our shows by Ryan, and I think it truly depends on what Geno does this year in Seattle. Sam Howell, I know there's been reports out of there from Greg Bell, who's a guy that comes on our show and is a reporter for the News Tribune in Tacoma in Washington, saying that Sam Howell was very inaccurate. Sam Howell, I look at, he's kind of going through the Alex Smith effect of 3 coordinators, first 3 years of his career. So he's learning a whole new system all over again. So he's a young quarterback still. He's, I think, only 23 or 24. I'm not so worried about that in training camp. Like, that doesn't scare me. And the fact that even finding out that McVay wanted to bring Howell into LA this offseason as one of the potential trade targets, I think it more depends on what happens with Geno, because if Geno doesn't put together a full season this year, because he's kind of done a good first half and a bad second half in 2022, and then last year it was a bad first half, good second half to the season. He needs to put a full season of work in. I think he needs to actually get Seattle into the playoffs, maybe push for a playoff win for them to recommit to him, because I've got a feeling that the way the roster is now constructed in Seattle and the way that the draft order, and like you were talking about, Paul, you guys love doing your mock drafts. There's a lot of teams that may finish in the top half of that draft that aren't necessarily franchise quarterback hunting. Mm-hmm. And I think that could bode well for a team like Seattle, where if they finish between, say, 15 and 25, could get a Quinn Ewers, potentially a Carson Beck. You know, one of these guys falls there because other teams are going for left tackles or defensive ends or corners or whatever it is. So I think there's a good chance Seattle's potential QB of the future isn't on the roster currently. And I think that all depends on how Geno's season goes. If Geno comes out and lights it up and throws for 30 touchdowns and close to 4,000 yards and Seattle wins a playoff game, I think there's a good chance Seattle re-ups and they still draft a guy. But they're kind of in this murky situation where it's truly dependent on how Geno does.
Yeah, I think he's one of those, the epitome of the quarterback that is too good to move on from, maybe at this point. But is he really the guy? You know, and I'm not going to try to answer that, but that's how I see him.
No, and that's a really fair analysis of it. He's kind of, in a way, like Alex Smith. When he was kind of moving, like in San Francisco, he starts to play really well. They draft Colin Kaepernick. Alex Smith gets moved on. Colin Kaepernick comes in. He goes to Kansas City, plays really well. And then Patrick Mahomes shows up and Alex Smith gets moved out the door. He's that guy where if you have him and you don't have anything else, he's going to win you 9 games is what he's shown in Seattle with talent around him. But I don't know if he's the guy that he can win you a Super Bowl necessarily on a fact of his ability alone. And that's the thing. Like, I do a tiering of quarterbacks where I go guys that win you games, guys that you win with, and guys that need a supporting cast around them to just survive. And he's always in that he can win games if he has talent, and he can win you a few, but he can't win you a game or multiple games like a Matthew Stafford. You look at how many times Matthew Stafford had Cooper Kupp missing, or one of your guys' top players missing, and he's able to go out and still throw for 300 yards and 4 scores, and you guys still win your games. I don't know if Geno's that guy. And that's the one thing where Seattle, and with John Schneider, coming from where his background is with Green Bay and you know, Ted Thompson and Mike Holmgren and that whole era, like, he's always kind of looking to get a quarterback, and Ron Wolf, that kind of background.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I do think Ryan Grubb's offense will potentially be the big determining factor in what happens with Geno and DK this year.
Based on your summary, then I think your fan base, one thing they'll like about Pete is that his calling card really is, so he's really great at great game management. And actually, that was one of the things that McVay, when they brought him in, that was sort of the assignment they gave him. So as you know, as McVay can sometimes get distracted during the game as multiple pieces are moving around, that was sort of Pete's responsibility. The other thing is that he does very, very well working with. He's worked with a lot of great quarterbacks, college level, NFL level. And one of the indices that are very, very important, that are very significant when he's in play, is the conversion rate. They always have a very, very positive conversion rate. So you will see an uptick in that conversion rate. So that might bode well for your offense this year, particularly for Geno Smith, to increase time of possession, being able to move the ball downfield, consistently longer drives, rest up the defense, use that power running game that you guys have. You guys got great running backs,
Yeah, no, it's sorry, go ahead, guys.
No, so that's what I'm saying. So like Pete's, you were asking about Pete. The way I look at it is I think it's going to mesh very well with the type of offense and the way your sort of personnel is set up.
Yeah, and that's the one thing. So like they actually kind of did a deep dive into the Pete Carroll kind of conversion rate, third down conversions in Seattle, where they ranked offensively during Pete Carroll's era. And a lot of people figured they ranked in the top 10. And a lot of people were like, oh, it must have been at least 5 times with Russell and that. There was one time in the entire Pete Carroll era in Seattle of the 14 years where the offense was top 10 in third down conversion. Other than that, they were always in the bottom half of the league. And that's, like you said, that's a problem. When we're playing teams like, obviously, the Rams, the 49ers, with good defenses, with good other play callers on the other side, you want to mitigate, especially with Shanahan and McVay, their kind of bites at the apple when it comes to calling the game. And we haven't done that. Like, I look at our game last year, our opening game versus you guys, where you guys came up here game 1, and it looked like Seattle had never really thought of, hey, let's manage the game. Like, let's actually try and, string together some plays here. And that was one thing that frustrated a lot of Seattle fans here with Shane Waldron, because he came from, obviously, the McVay system, and that was the big thing when we hired him. Oh, he's going to bring McVay's offense to Seattle and with Russell and all this kind of stuff. And the thing I kind of kept saying, and maybe you guys can speak to a little bit more because obviously you're involved with the Rams. I looked at Shane Waldron and I kind of went, he's not a true McVay disciple. He had come from Belichick and this whole thing, and he was the tight ends coach there and so on. And I never looked at Shane and went, he's been an OC somewhere else, or he's, gotten a little bit more at what McVay is doing. Like, he's kind of just been this off piece that's there. And then they went and hired him. And I went, okay, like, let's see how this goes. And it just kind of fizzled. It never, like, he'd have some good games and stuff, but it always seemed with Seattle, like the last couple of years at least, if the initial set of plays in the script didn't work for Shane Waldron, he could never adjust. He'd keep banging his head into the wall. And it's like, you come out, you go into halftime, you think they're going to make some sort of adjustment, and it comes out and it's the same set of plays again. And you're just kind of sitting there as a Seahawks fan going like, really? Like, this isn't working. It hasn't worked for the first 2 quarters of the game. What's going to change between now and then to make you think this is going to work again? And so if he could stay on script and a team didn't have an adjustment for what he was coming out with, Seattle's offense looked great. And so I saw PFF today put out a thing of the top 10 offensive coordinators in the NFL, and Shane Waldron finished 6th.
Really?
And I was 6th. And I kind of went, that's interesting, because he never had a top 10 offense in Seattle with all the weapons. So how do you become a top 10 OC when you don't make a top 10 offense? And just the math there with PFF, sometimes I always kind of scratch my head going, does that really make sense?
I think a lot of the Rams offensive assistants, they're obviously in McVay's shadow, and they probably over the years have gotten more credit than they deserve in some cases. And Waldron, I can't speak to the specifics. I don't remember exactly what his role was or how Ram fans felt about his contribution to the team, but I haven't seen anything or know of anything that would indicate, future success as an offensive coordinator, other than he was associated with McVay, kind of like what you're getting at, I guess.
Waldron has a positive track record, but I agree with you. Like, his offense, I don't think is, when you look at his offense, I don't think you're like, wow, this is like a space age offense. This is so far ahead of the curve. I think he was more of that balanced attack. And I think, it's interesting, right when it happened, we were doing a roundtable when that I think you released both your tight ends. I think you released both of them at the same day, right? If I'm not mistaken. We were doing the roundtable. We had just, obviously Higbee got hurt in the Detroit game. And I was like, well, Seattle just released all their tight ends, and, and we're trying to figure out why it's going. And it makes a lot of sense, right? So and you're bringing in this guy from Washington, right? Michael Penix and that great wide receiver core. And are you expecting him to run a lot of, four wides, a lot of those crossing routes?
It's going to be interesting because for Grubb coming into Washington, this is kind of the interest, into Seattle out of Washington. He's kind of got a almost carbon copy of what he had at Washington in the three receivers. So he had Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk, and Roma Dunze. Well, now you've got DK Metcalf, JSN, and Tyler Lockett. The interesting thing, though, about Grubb, and this is one thing I think that kind of gets lost because of the success he had at Washington with their high-flying offense, was when he was down at Fresno State with DeBoer, they ran the ball really well. He's got an O-line background. So when he was at Eastern Michigan, they had one of the top rushing offenses in college football, and this was back, I think, 10 years ago. But he's kind of always had that kind of side in him. And so what I really look at, and this gets lost, especially in last year's success for Washington, is how important Dylan Johnson was to that offense for the Huskies.
Unbelievable.
When he ran for 100 yards or so, their offense was better than when he was under that. And so I think what you're going to see in Seattle, I think you're going to see a lot more three receiver sets with one tight end, and they're going to really use Noah Fant differently than he's been used, which is why I think they brought him back. So like when Seattle did do that, and they released Will Dissly and, Colby Parkinson hit free agency, and so did Noah Fant. Me and Ryan had on our show here, we were kind of like, okay, it's either you bring back Noah Fant or you bring back Colby Parkinson. And I was kind of in the camp of Parkinson because I don't know if we've seen his ceiling yet where he's actually used how he should be used as a down the middle, stretch the defense, use his size. He's gotten better as a blocker than when he first came into the league. Let's try and get him back because he's still young. He doesn't have the wear and tear. And then obviously you guys came in and hit it out of the park with your offer. So then Noah Fant came back. And I went, you know what? That's not so bad because Noah Fant, again, was known as a receiving tight end coming in, but he's never been used right in Shane Waldron's offense. Like everything Shane Waldron did with Noah Fant last year was outside of the numbers, nothing down the middle of the field. And so I look at Noah Fant's build. He's like 6'6". He's a big guy. There was never really any seam balls for Noah Fant. There was never any use of, hey, let's use him in the middle of the field. And that's where I look at Grubb. And the one thing I think that's going to be the big call card for Grubb, pre-snap motion and moving guys around. And that's the one thing I think that may cause more difficulty now from what people have known of Seattle. So like what your guys have seen, hey, DK Metcalf's always at the bottom of the screen. He's always the left side receiver. Grubb has a tendency to kind of move guys around and create space on the field with formations, with motions to get his key guys into certain matchups he wants, which that's one thing I looked at Shane Waldron and went, you were never looking at matchups. You said this was what we were going to do, and I know it best, and this is how we're going to run things. Now I look at Ryan Grubb coming in and Scott Huff, the O-line coach, and I go, and even Jake Peets, and I go, I think this is more of a, hey, let's actually scheme how we're going to attack teams every week rather than, hey, we can just carbon copy paste and put it on to the next one.
Yeah, I'm sort of surprised too with the I'm in the same boat as you are, because when they let Parkinson go, because all the screaming about the offensive line, I figured you'd go with the guy that's a better blocker, right? And talk about threatening the seam with his size. Parkinson's tailor-made for that. Noah Fant can definitely do that as well. But you have three. I think if you look at your running back depth, Walker, Charbonnet, and people are sleeping on McIntosh. That kid can play, man. You don't come from Georgia and not know how to play. That's SEC football. So, the strength of your team is definitely going to be on the ground attack, man. There's no question about it. And I think Charbonnet is going to surprise a lot of people. That kid is just an unstoppable force, as is Walker. So you have a lot of depth there. Your wide receiver core, I think, is definitely underrated. I think it's a solid wide receiver core. And we were laughing. One of the players when you guys signed him last year was Bobo. The kid from UCLA. I was like, oh man, this kid is going to surprise a lot of people. And I hear already in your training camp this year, I think he only had 20 catches last year, but this year already in training camp, he's like they bring him up every day. Because I do the NFC, I always watch the NFC West breakdown after every training camp day, and they always bring up Bobo, right? He's going to be that kid that everybody's going to be like, oh, remember Largent? Obviously, not in the same class as Largent. but he's going to move the chains. The kid's tough as nails. He's going to come to work, and he's going to be a great presence in the locker room. I also like Lockett. I mean, Lockett, we can never stop him, right? And that kid is he's a big game player.
Yeah,
so,
I've talked to Paul and Ian about this.
Mark always brings him up.
I don't know how many times there has been a game, the Rams and Seahawks, and you know what? I have to say, I have a lot of respect for the culture and the way Seattle has played football over the last 15, 20 years. They find ways to win games. Sometimes games they shouldn't win. They find ways to win games. And I don't know how many times I've been sitting on a couch thinking, we got this. We got this. Just run out the clock, force a punt, and there's Tyler Lockett, 55-yard catch up the seam. And you go, here we go. Here go the Seahawks. And over the years, I think we've, it's been pretty even. Even when the Rams were horrible, we played the Seahawks tough. And when the Rams got better, the games were, for the most part, really entertaining football and good stuff. Rams, Seahawks have a really good history over the last 15 years, especially. And Tyler Lockett, man, he could be a Ram receiver any day, as far as I'm concerned. We'll take him.
Well, I'll be honest. I think, a lot of us Seahawk podcasters and, different people think this is probably Tyler Lockett's last year in Seattle. I don't think they're going to bring him back next year. I think that's why they reworked his deal this year, mainly because we have JSN, who I think they want to get more involved in the offense. They're going to have to pay DK at some point coming up either end of this year or into next. But when you're talking about Bobo, it was funny when he showed up last year and I started watching training camp and seeing these guys. The first guy that popped into my head when I saw him run and how he ran his routes and how strong he was at the point of attack of catching the football was Joe Jaravicius. That's literally where my brain went, was Joe Jaravicius. And I went, this is exactly what Joe used to do for the Buccaneers and even for the Seahawks for a bit. Was I'm going to run. I'm going to be your 10 to 15 yard chain moving third down security blanket. I'm going to find that zone. I'm going to sit in it, put the ball on me, and I'll make the catch. And so, he had a phenomenal catch actually 2 days ago on Monday. He made this diving catch first day in pads in the pouring rain here, which every reporter that was there thought Sam Howell had overthrown this ball into the back of the end zone. And all of a sudden, Bobo just jumps out fully, grabs the ball and hangs onto it. And so DK yesterday made a one-handed catch, and some reporter asked him in his press conference, he goes, what's more impressive, your catch or Jake's? And before he could even finish his question to DK goes, oh, it was Jake Bobo's. He's like, that was an unbelievable catch. I don't know how he even did it. And so they had Jake on one of the local shows, and they said, what's the weirdest thing you've experienced now being a pro athlete? He goes, last year in training camp, my fourth day, DK Metcalf walks up to me and goes, I do not understand how a skinny-ass white kid like yourself gets open. He's like, you're slow and you're not that fast. I am physically better than you, but you get more open than I do. And so apparently Jake's been working with DK on how to get separation and how to do those things, because that's what Jake knows. That's his calling card. And so I think Jake Bobo, I got a feeling he's going to have more yards and catches than people anticipate this year. And I could see a point, and this is crazy, but I could see a point where he might even, in some games, out-snap Tyler Lockett with JSN and DK Metcalf because of his versatility and how he can affect blocking in the running game, because he'll get in there and he'll take on linebackers. He's not a small dude, and he'll go in there and block. And like you said, with Seattle's running game, I think that could be one of the ways he gets on the field a little bit more than, say, Tyler Lockett does this year.
I love that.
It's Lockett's career is winding.
Go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, if Lockett's career is winding down, maybe it's just a time changing of the guard. JSN, Bobo, DK Metcalf makes sense. Sorry, Paul, what were you going to say?
No. That's actually a really good point. I mean, I think everybody goes through that. All the teams go through that. We're facing that with Cooper Kupp. He's his mega contract. Unless he has a triple crown season, I mean, that's going to be a big decision for the Rams for us for next year. So that's something that, I mean, Mark's point, that I think every team sort of goes through that. Go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just going to say, I thought you were going to segue into my new favorite Rams receiver.
Go ahead, tell everyone.
The Rams run this 11 personnel but it's really 12 personnel because all these receivers can block. I think that's how we have nuanced it anyways. And this 6th-round pick, Jordan Whittington, keep an eye on him. He's another one of those guys that just fit what the Rams do. Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, these guys, and Demarcus Robinson. These guys lay people out in the blocking game, and they're as important in the running game as they are in the passing game. They really are. And that's, I think, one of the reasons the Rams went after Parkinson. If they run one tight end out there, they want a guy that can just lay people out as well. But sorry, I cut you off again, Paul.
No, I'm just, I love the comparison by Jaravicius, 6'4", 210, Bobo, and those dimensions make a lot of sense. But, I think the running game for Seattle is going to be huge because that O-line, if it's still questionable, that's the way you're going to protect your passing game, right? Don't get yourself in those long yardage situations. Keep growing, wear out the defense, hit them with the play action. The quarterback's best friend is play action. There's no question about it. And that's the one thing that in terms of if the O-line is still, if you want to say the area of weakness, or I don't like to use the word weakness, I like to use area of development and continued development, then that's the way you're really going to attack it. What I think is interesting is your D-line. I mean, you got Williams, you got Reed, and now you got Murph, man. That's going to be an interesting D-line up front.
No, yeah. And so kind of segueing into like our Seattle draft here and to get you guys' thoughts, obviously Byron Murphy was our first pick and you guys wanted him down there pretty badly in LA. It's kind of interesting with our D-line now because you've got Leonard Williams coming back for his first training camp fully. You've got Jaron Reed. We also signed Jonathan Hankins off of Dallas's roster, which I think is a sneaky kind of good veteran signing in there to be that true run stopper for you in the middle.
Mark, that's our John Robinson signing. That's their signing.
Pretty much, yeah. We obviously added Byron Murphy. And then the other guy that I actually think might have a resurgence this year because of the change in coaching is Draymond Jones. Because he was so improperly used last year. And it actually John Schneider kind of let it slip a little bit in a interview where they said that basically, I think it was him and Mike Macdonald were in an interview and they got asked about Draymond Jones. And basically, John kind of said, yeah, well, Draymond didn't necessarily play where we thought he was going to play. And it was like, oh, that's kind of interesting because they had Draymond Jones at points lining up inside. Then he was way outside and he was all over the place. And they never really solidified what he was going to do. And when they put him on the edge, that's where he started having an effect later on in the season for us. They dropped his weight. He's, I think, dropped about 20 pounds now. And they're actually playing him as outside linebacker, edge player now in Seattle. So I think it's going to be really interesting how Macdonald, because of what he did obviously in Baltimore, and the other guy that I will let you guys in on that I think is going to be probably the dark horse that actually gets more playing time than people realize is Mike Morris. So Mike Morris we drafted 2 years ago, but he got injured all of last year. He was out with a shoulder injury, but his best year was in Michigan under Mike Macdonald. And so when he got drafted by Seattle, Seattle had him up his weight to 300 when he played really at 280. And as soon as Mike Macdonald showed up, basically told him, drop your weight. And apparently from training camp reports, he's flying around. They're moving him up and down the line everywhere. So you got him, Murphy, Reed, Williams, Jones, Hankins, like Cam Young, who we drafted last year, who didn't really have much of an impact. Like Seattle right now is in a weird spot where we actually have a D-line that can do a lot of different things. And we're not kind of pigeonholed into this is only what we can do.
And I think, Paul, didn't we I know we talked about Morris 2 years ago, and Boya Mafe, he had a really good year, didn't he? And then the other guy that I think we may have mocked to the Rams, I think it was 2 years ago. Is it Derek Hall?
Derek Hall, one of my favorites from Auburn.
Right. Yeah. So you got some depth there for sure.
Well, and that's the key thing for us. Like we get Chenna back, who when he went down last year, that really affected Boye Mafe a lot. And I think Boye's come back kind of understanding now that he can't be he had success with a certain set of moves, and now he's got to kind of develop those counters off of those moves because in a situation, if Chenna goes down, he is now the top pass rusher on the team based off of that. Derek Hall apparently is just ripping it up in camp this year. And again, another guy that I don't think Pete Carroll knew how to use personally, and Clint Hurt, I should say more directly as the defensive coordinator. He was a great edge setter at Auburn. And all of a sudden, this guy, again, coming out of the SEC, you don't just forget how to play football when you get drafted as a second-round talent. So part of me makes me think that, like, hey, did you guys really know how to use this guy? And then the other guy is Darrell Taylor, who had 9.5 sacks 2 years ago. He's kind of fallen down into like being the third guy, fourth guy in that rotation of edge rushers. And I wonder truly if he doesn't buy in and have a good training camp, he could be a trade piece or a surprise cut for Seattle, because he's basically playing on a non-guaranteed deal right now for 1 year. He's really got to show that he can get back to that 9.5 sack form he had 2 years ago, because he's a great pass rushing specialist, but that's all he can do. And the one thing Mike Macdonald has said from the beginning is you have to be able to do a little bit of everything in my defense. You can't just be a one-trick pony. And a prime example was a guy that we cut and then we brought back an old draft pick by Seattle and Marquise Blair. We cut Jonathan Sutherland, who was a good safety. Like, he was potentially going to start last year at points with Jamal Adams being out. He obviously got hurt at the end of training camp, but he was basically just a box safety. He couldn't play nickel. He couldn't play free. He was just, that was it. Now Seattle's safety room is very, very multiple in the fact of Rayshon Jenkins, Julian Love, Kayvon Wallace, Kobe Bryant, and now Marquise Blair.
How do you feel about your inside linebacker situation? I know you lost Jordan Brooks and Bobby Wagner, an institution up there. He's just been a big part of that Seattle team over the last 10, 12 years, except for the 1 year in LA, of course. But
I'm actually okay with what they did, because it was Leonard Williams or it was Jordan Brooks is who they were going to pay. And when you give up a second round and fifth round pick for a guy like Leonard Williams, I think the impact of him on the D-line in the trenches makes a more impactful statement for your defense. And the way that I kind of look at it as a whole is inside off the ball linebacker isn't a premier position like it used to be when Ray Lewis and Brian Urlacher and all these guys played. You look at even San Francisco, Fred Warner wasn't a high draft pick. He wasn't. And so when I look at it and I look at you bring in a coach that ran the best defense in the NFL last year and his position of specialty is linebacker, I tend to lead to his kind of preference on what he wants. And the fact they went out and brought in Tyrell Dotson and Jerome Baker, I think one of them is going to play themselves into a contract extension in Seattle. And then they go out and draft Tyrese Knight, which I'll be honest, a lot of Seahawks fans did not like where we took Knight. But I think it got to a point for Mike Macdonald, I should say, where he went, I want to make a pick that's my guy, that I know and understand that I'm going to turn in. I think he is going to unlock Tyrese Knight. And I think Tyrese Knight, whether it's halfway through this year, if Jerome Baker gets hurt, because he has some injury issues, and that's part of the reason Miami let him go. I think Knight either plays himself into a role or he just takes the job from Baker at some point once he understands the defense and the nuances of it. Because the kid, like, he flies around and he does not miss tackles when he gets his hands on you. Like, he brings you to the ground. So I honestly think Tyrese Knight is going to be a very sneaky pick in this draft class that people don't realize the impact he'll eventually have in Seattle. So to answer your question, I'm not overly worried. The only concern I have is after Tyrese Knight, Dotson, and Baker, the depth's a little thin. Like, we've got John Radigan, who's been around for a very long time, Patrick O'Connell, who moved from kind of an edge role where he played at Montana to linebacker last year, was on our practice squad. So it'll be interesting. I could see Seattle making a move at the end of the preseason, one of those, hey, this guy's going to get cut. He's a veteran. Let's bring him in because he gives us some stability kind of a thing. That's the one thing. But I think other than that, I think they're pretty set with their top three inside backers, and I'm actually okay with that grouping.
Yeah, Tyrese Knight, we actually talked about him. And that's the one thing that through our mock drafts, I think Paul and I became pretty educated about a lot of these guys. And he's a guy we like for the Rams, because the Rams are in a similar situation. Ernest Jones is vastly underrated. He's a great linebacker. Last year of his contract, we're hoping the Rams pay him, but there's no guarantee they will. I think they will, but kind of the same deal. How much do you want to pay an inside linebacker these days?
Bringing in Macdonald, I think, was the right choice. When all these different coaches were available, we were talking about it. I was like, man, because the year that defense put together last year is one for the ages. It was just absolutely. I don't even think it was talked about enough, to be honest with you. It should have dominated ESPN every week. But I think your Draymond Jones example is spot on. Like, you bring in a coach like Macdonald. So what's the staple of that defense? It's a hybrid defense. And these are and I think that's what you were hinting on. Draymond Jones, Morris are these hybrid players. You cannot put them in these traditional 1970 roles and say, listen, play a 5 technique. That's not exactly what they want. And it doesn't surprise me. They told Draymond to, hey, listen, drop 10 pounds. We'll stand you up at 271 and, whatever it may be. That's exactly what Baltimore has done pretty much for the last 2 decades, right? They have that big elephant backer, right, who winds up getting double-digit sacks. And I think Draymond Jones, if I'm not mistaken, he averages about, 6 sacks across his career. He's somewhere in that number. So I can see him definitely. I think Morris is also, you give him a role where he can just get after it, where he doesn't have to stop and think, and he can just be aggressive to the football, And I think you're right. I think they're going to play it, pretty aggressive. I know the secondary is a little bit, that's an area that still needs some development. But I will say this: I do like the fact in the 6th round, DJ James and Pritchett. I think those were some solid picks. I especially like James. I think, in the long term, you might hear their names in a very positive way. But I think having a coach like Macdonald, he's going to install that hybrid defense. That's what is the name of the game in the NFL right now. You can't go out and run a zone all game. You have to be able to mix it up. More importantly, you have to get to the quarterback. It's the name of the game. If you cannot get to the quarterback in this league, you're done. You're sub 500.
And that was the thing that was interesting. If you watch Macdonald's defense, because everyone thought he was an extremely blitz-happy coordinator in Baltimore, they really didn't. They really just, the way they manipulated pressure with 4, but you just didn't know which 4 were coming. And that was the whole thing that I think, when we went into there and we played the Ravens, they completely embarrassed Shane Waldron and that entire Seahawks team that day. I think we lost 37-3 or something like that. And Gino and guys on the offense were telling John Schneider, I don't know what just hit us. We've never seen anything like this. And that's the one thing that I'm kind of excited for about the hiring of Mike Macdonald is you didn't go and get a disciple. It's not like hiring, Matt LaFleur or, Mike McDaniel out of San Francisco. When you're getting a guy, yes, he understands the system and he's creative, but it's not getting McVay or Shanahan that are at the forefront of that creativity. Now Seattle's getting that on the defensive side, I think, in Mike Macdonald, where you see his guys have kind of gone off throughout the league, but the true master of that defense is the head coach now in Seattle, and he's brought guys in. And this was the interesting thing, I think, with Seattle's offseason, with the coaching staff at least, was there wasn't a lot of plucking from that Ravens staff. There was one guy he brought from the Ravens staff. Other than that, he went out and hired a bunch of different coaches, and I think the best hire they made on that coaching staff was Leslie Frazier.
Oh, without question. Yeah.
Leslie Frazier coming in, his DB background, his ability to run top defenses in the NFL, now paired with Mike Macdonald being like, hey, look, I've been a head coach. These are the things you don't do. These are the things you do. This is how you avoid this and that. I think it's going to kind of like when, and I tie it to you guys actually, when you guys hired Sean McVay, you brought in Wade Phillips, a guy that had been an NFL head coach, had successful defenses. You brought him in and kind of said, hey, look, this is how you become a head coach. These are the things you do. These are the things you don't do. And I think that, kind of fast track things, because I look at this change and I look at it not calling Jeff Fisher Pete Carroll, but you went through the similar thing where you guys couldn't get over being 8-9 or 7-9 or whatever the record was at that time, when however many games we were playing. But that was kind of the stump that the Rams couldn't get over with Jeff Fisher. You kick him out. You bring in the whiz kid of the offensive side with this relatively the same roster. You guys didn't do a massive overhaul that first year McVay got there. And all of a sudden you guys became an 11-win team and you kind of almost made the Super Bowl even that year. You had your playoff run and whatnot. I kind of look at it the same way with Mike Macdonald now. The more I've kind of digested this whole change of regime is we were a 9-win team with the talent we have. We've added to it with a good draft class. And now you've brought in a guy that I think is going to be able to kind of work that talent and unleash it in a way Pete Carroll never would have been able to. And I think this pushes Seattle to maybe a 10 or 11 win team if a couple games break their way that they may not deserve to win. But it kind of just is, there's similarities there that I see where John Schneider, I think, looked at what the Rams had done and had gone, let's bring in someone that's the forefront of the new cutting edge thing. Let's pair him with a veteran NFL head coach that's been there, seen it all, done things on the same side of the ball, and let's make this work.
Yeah, and the Rams defense in those Jeff Fisher years, for the most part, wasn't really that bad. It was just the offense was so pitiful that it put so much stress on them, 3 and outs. Eventually the defense breaks,
And in Seattle, it's kind of been the opposite because our defense the last 4 or 5 years in Seattle has been pretty bad. Our offense has been pretty decent, like I'd say middle of the pack good, where they were getting stressed because they could not keep up the production to hide the defense not being able to do it. You go and hire the guy that's going to fix your issue. You guys went and hired McVay. We went and hired Mike Macdonald.
In further elaborating, because I think your observations are very astute. I think the McVay example is very relevant to your example here in Seattle. Is that you bring in a coach. The most important thing is what is the identity and the culture that comes along with it, right? So you think about it. 2 seasons in a row, I think you guys gave up 400 points. Is that correct? Yeah. So it makes only sense. You're in a division, right? You got you talk about McVay, right? You got Shanny as well. So it only makes sense that you want to bring in a defensive coach, and especially a defensive coach that's coming off of probably a very singular defensive performance and a very innovative coach on top of that. So he's going to bring that identity, right? A more physical, aggressive identity. And the way you describe his defense is spot on. So they play a very aggressive style, but watch the way the Ravens play, the discipline, the understanding of leverage by their corners and their linebackers. They never give anything away. They're always in the right position. That's why they can play so aggressively. So people focus, like you were saying, if we do an analysis, they're blitzing every down. Not really. They have such great gap discipline. They have such understanding of what to do, such great play recognition, right? So they play their system so well and so disciplined that they can be aggressive. So bringing that mindset, right, to be, listen, we need to know our roles. This is our job. We need to know what our job. We need to be physical at all times, right? But we also need to be the fastest player on the field, regardless of where you are. Speed at all positions. So I think, he's bringing his identity. And there's something that I think not a lot of people are talking about. And one of the things I said in one of our podcasts when the hire was made is that he's bringing along one of the best coaches. He's been under one of the best head coaches in the league. How much has he taken away from that? He's going to bring that structure. And we see it even with McVay. I mean, if they had kept Wade Phillips, honestly, that would have saved McVay a lot of grief. I think letting Wade Phillips go is something that he realized he probably shouldn't have. But having that veteran in the background, I think is really, your Leslie Frazier example is a great one. A great example is, so McVay actually brought in one of his assistant coaches whose only job is game management and timeouts. That's it. So, as a head coach, he understands where his shortcoming is and how it's impacting the game. So that's a very, very, relevant example in terms of what we're talking about. Mike Macdonald's going to come in. He's going to put his signature on this team, and it makes a lot of sense, right? And your extrapolation of listen, hey, if the defense is 50% better, we immediately get better by 1.5 wins. Makes a lot of sense, right? So.
That's kind of how I look at it. And the other thing I look at with particularly with Mike Macdonald is to your point, he went out and learned under John and Jim. He got both Harbaugh brothers. And if you look at his first year as the DC in Baltimore, and this was something I dove into kind of last week, I wanted to see what the jump was because Baltimore's always been known for defense, but they kind of went through that before he got there, a bit of that struggling point under Marty. I can't remember his name now. Something Dale. What is his last name? He was with the Giants. He got fired. Martindale.
Martindale. Yeah.
Yeah.
There, thank you. Yes. And he came in, they were 23rd. He got them to 8th overall DVOA in his first year as a DC. Then obviously we saw what he did last year. He got him to first. I look at Seattle and I go, there is so much talent there. You've got, in that secondary, I know it doesn't, people look and they see Witherspoon, but you got Reek Woolen, who I think people kind of after last year kind of forgot about him. The way Leslie Frazier has been talking about Tariq Woolen is that he's going to be their traveling corner now. Like, that's a new thing to Seattle's defense, is having your job, go cover Cooper Kupp if that's your role. That's your job for your assignment for the day. Go do that. Witherspoon, I think you're going to see, I think the Kyle Hamilton role when Mike Macdonald's defense last year is going to get split between two guys. I think it's going to be split between Witherspoon and Julian Love. And that's why I think you saw the Julian Love extension, because of how smart Julian Love is as a safety. It's also going to free up Witherspoon to kind of go be that junkyard dog that he is, and that aggressive and that kind of whole energy he brings to the defense. And then you look at the rest of it, and this is where Seattle's corner room is kind of interesting, and what we're watching in camp here is you have Mike Jackson, who's played very well the last 2 years. He's not going to blow your socks off, but he's a good, solid corner. The other guy that's in a contract year this year that's apparently been lighting it up is Trey Brown. And he's someone that a lot of people don't realize how good he actually is as a corner. He was the number 1 or number 2 ranked press man coverage corner last year, rating-wise in the NFL. Then you've got DJ James and Pritchett that they just got in the draft. That room is extremely full at 6 deep. Like, you're really at 6 deep at that point. And that's not to mention Kobe Bryant, who played nickel for us his rookie year and now has been moved to safety, but can still come in and play that role. Again, that's where that versatility with Mike Macdonald's thing is so much different than Pete Carroll's. Pete Carroll's like, you're a left corner, you're the right corner. We're playing cover 3. And then when he tried to mesh into this Vic Fangio thing the last couple of years, it was a mess. It truly was. He didn't really, and this was Pete's downfall, I think, ultimately. He never went out of, besides Shane Waldron, he never went outside of what he knew when it came to hiring coaches. And that's what was so frustrating as a Seahawks fan. It was like you see all these other teams going and getting, these different guys, these up-and-comers that are outside of the tree, and Pete would scoff at it. The Shane Waldron thing was forced by Russell Wilson. We all know that. Didn't work out. But that's where I look at Ryan Grubb going, yeah, you know what? I want to take the guy that ran the best offense in college football and his O-line coach and pluck him away from Alabama, and I'm going to bring them in. And I'm going to bring in the D-line coach from Dallas, who is this British guy that most people don't really know about, but has created a great D-line down in Dallas. And I'm going to make him my DC, and I'm going to still call plays, but I'm going to get him caught up to speed on how to do it. Just like all this kind of pulling Jake Peets and all these other guys he's brought in, it makes it really, really interesting to see what Seattle can do now that they have kind of this, I would say, new lease on life with the talent they have, because they haven't overhauled this roster. It's not like new coaching staff, everybody's out, we're going to overhaul everything. It's, hey, look, we've got a really good team of young players. We need somebody that can actually structure them and get them to their potential.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if, I'm one of those guys that I think everybody's a contender except for maybe 2 or 3 teams, and I'm not counting Seattle out this year. They could very well make a playoff run, make a chase for a wild card spot. But, if that doesn't happen, it's just a matter of how long it is going to take, right? Is it going to be next year or the year after? But I think they're on the right road. They're on the right path. Definitely. And they're a team, like I've already suggested, they're never a fun team to play. Actually, it is fun playing the Seahawks. Rams Seahawks games are always fun, sometimes painful, sometimes really stressful. But I would never, every year I see the over-under win totals on the Seahawks, I always say take the over pretty much. They're going to find a way. They're kind of like the Steelers and Mike Tomlin. It's not a sure thing, but it's a good guess to say they're going to overperform a little bit.
That was one thing under Carroll, that they were the type of team, like a lunch pail team that you pack a lunch, right? They're going to play for 60 minutes. And like Mark said, right, they're going to find a way that if you let up off the gas and let them back into the game, they're going to make you pay. And then, of course, you got the 12th man, which is a really nice advantage. I have a question for you. Are you guys concerned that, you brought a lot of these coaches that have college experience, but not a lot of NFL experience? Are you guys concerned about that?
I'm not, just because I feel this is the one thing I kind of noticed, and it started with quarterbacks in the draft. And the rule of thumb used to be with quarterbacks when you drafted them, years and years ago, was you had to sit them because they were never ready to come in and play right away, because the systems in the NFL were so much different than the systems in college. And as we saw, that gap kind of started to change roughly around, I'd say 2013, 2012, when RG3 and Andrew Luck came in and the read option came into the NFL. And you started to see that change happen. So for me, I see more similarities now in college coaching than I did before. So like I look at like what Andy Reid does with Mahomes and Matt LaFleur, and even some of what McVay does. You look at some of these concepts and things that they do. Like you think of what Puka Nacua did as a receiver last year. Most rookie receivers don't do what Puka Nacua did, but it's kind of becoming a more of a norm thing for rookie receivers to have an immediate impact. Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, you look at these guys, and it's because I feel like NFL teams and coaches have now realized, and a lot of them have come from college, that if we make this an easier transition, we get more out of our players initially. So that's why for me, like I know a lot of people have said, oh, there's a lot of college coaches that have moved up into Seattle and stuff. And I'm like, nah, I don't know if it's as big of a deal as you guys make it. At the end of the day, football's football. And I think their job now in college is to prepare these guys for the NFL. So there's a little bit more connect there, I think, between the college game and the NFL game than there was 20 years ago.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. No, I think you're right. Absolutely. I think the transfer is a lot easier today than it's ever been.
Yeah, I think the Rams have been successful with their drafts because they've got it down, their analytics and their approach and the things they value, the things they don't value, and it seems to be working, especially at wide receiver.
So just to kind of wrap up this show, guys, what do you think the division will look like at the end of the year? Do you think it's the 49ers on top and then everybody else, or how do you think this shakes out? What are your opinions?
Mark,
I'll go first, I guess. Yeah, I'll go first. I still have a lot of respect for the 49ers, their roster, and what they can do. And I would pick them to win the division. I think the Rams have to stay healthy, especially on defense. And if they do, I think they'll be number 2. Seattle and Arizona will be fighting for number 3, and I think they could both overperform. I don't pretend to be a savant or an expert, but I see it to be a pretty strong division, though. It's going to be stronger than people expect, I think.
Yeah, from our perspective, I know I speak for the whole Rams Up family. Like, we want the NFC West to be the strongest division. We always say iron strengthens iron. So when the teams are, when we're a black and blue division, I think it helps everybody within the division. So I'm hoping that for me, it's always going to be the team that's healthiest is going to take the division. It's that simple. If the team that's healthiest is going to take the division, for your fan base, the Rams, we have 2 rookies, particularly if you want to keep an eye on Brandon Fisk. We call him the Fisk factor, and Jared Verse on defense, which is really going to jumpstart. We have from last year the conductor Kobe Turner, right? So we're looking to see like the pass rush is going to be hopefully much more electric this year than last year. And to your point about the season predictions, Mark, we could share with them that, the Rams were not expecting to make the playoffs last year. And I think that's a great example. And that was a source of annoyance, I know, for me personally, when teams go into a season and you start throwing the towel. I mean, that's the wrong way to go. You can't predict when your team is going to sort of, and we, as Ram fans, we always say, think about 99 when Kurt Warner came from bagging groceries, right? To hold up the trophy. So that's why we always say, like, every year is an exciting year because any team can, come out of nowhere and just and win it. So, if somebody in your division has a bad year, or if somebody in your division has a rash of injuries like we did in 22, it could change the whole dynamic. So we're really excited about our season. Some fantasy players that you might want to keep an eye on. So Cooper's had a great preseason for you guys in the Hawk Zone. So he might be a nice a pickup. Puka is going to definitely, I know people are saying there might be a downtick in volume. We don't think so. We think Stafford's going to light it up. We think Stafford's going to lead the NFC in yards and touchdowns and quarterback rating. We think he's going to probably have his best year, one of the best years of his career. He's probably going to have the most efficient year of his career. So those would be two really good fantasy players. Aaron Kyren, we think, is a lock, 1,100 plus yards and double-digit touchdowns. And Corum's going to be a great handcuff if you get them both. That might be a nice one. And Parkinson, I think, is going to be a great steal at tight end. If you're
in a dynasty league, take Jordan Whittington.
Yes, he's a nice stash player. And Demarcus Robinson, our WR3, gets a lot of play. So he might be a nice one for, when you have those buys and you need to put somebody in, and he gets a lot of looks in the red zone. So might be a good play as well.
Well, that's awesome information, guys. I appreciate that. So outside of that, we're going to kind of wrap up the show here, but what are your guys' ways? Like, how do people get into your show, listen to you guys? Like, where's the best way to find you guys?
Well, we are a member of the Fans First Sports Network. So we publish the podcast, during the season, it'll be 5 or 6 times a week. So you can find us on all the platforms. And we also have a YouTube channel, /@LA Rams Up. And the YouTube channel, we publish the audio, automatically gets published to YouTube, but we also do the videos. We try to do those at least once a week. And during the season, we're kind of just getting rolling on what we call our roundtable. And, Paul and Ian, we all have regular jobs. We try to get it done every Tuesday night. And during the season, we hope to increase that, time permitting. And Paul and Ian want to do some like a coach's corner type stuff, trying to educate Ram fans like they have been with me over the past 6 or 8 months. So the YouTube channel and the podcast, easy to find. And if you have the time, go to check out our channel, subscribe. We really appreciate it.
We do a lot of historical references as well, talking about like how Mark does a great Mark's very modest. So one of the things we always have to sort of help him along is Mark does a great segment where he invites Ram fans on, and anybody who wants can email, and he will invite them on, and they can talk about how they became Ram fans, who's their favorite player, their fondest memory. I promised Mark I was going to work in a Jim Zorn reference, my favorite Seahawk of all time. Right, I love it.
We were just talking the other night about the who was the receiver? Was it Largent?
It was Largent, yeah.
Had the payback on the
that was awesome.
The viral, that was pretty impressive.
And that's actually a great segment, Bryce. I think everybody would love. There is, when they did the top 100 of all time, it was Largent and Dion. And it was a great segment. I was like shocked. I had like 2 players that I never would have thought that had such a great dynamic. Dion said that Largent was one of his top 3 receivers all time.
Interesting.
Would you have really that from Dion
to say that? Yeah.
Yeah. And then Largent just shared about how tough as nails he was, and he talked about that play that Mark is citing. So we do a lot of historical references. So we invite everybody to, come in and, take a listen. We hope you find it interesting. We have open comments. People can comment on a lot of different things. We have fans that comment from a lot of different team backgrounds. So we always look forward to that.
Yeah, we do a little segment. I do a little segment on a lot of podcasts where I, if it's episode 387, I'll talk about a Ram who wore number 87, and I'll go back to the 60s or the 70s and spend a couple minutes. I love doing that. Just a lot of younger fans that don't know about the Nolan Cromwells and guys like that. Love talking about that too.
Well, that's awesome, guys, and I really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your schedule to come on our show. It was great to have you guys talk about the Rams and the Seahawks and that whole situation, how it's going to shape up this offseason and this season. So for everyone in the Hawk Zone, don't forget to subscribe, review, comment on this, and follow both Paul here and Mark, at the Rams Up podcast. All right, guys, thanks for coming on, and everyone else, go Hawks.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks a lot.
NFC West Pride.